Thank you, Mr President, and I rise to speak to the proposed amendment of the Public Health and Wellbeing Act 2008 that aims to extend the state of emergency by a further 6 months. The new normal is infinite and uncertain, and as a state we need to figure out how we are to adjust to this and find ways to do so where we don't have to rely on people being in total lockdown, and ultimately where we do not have to rely on a state of emergency to manage our response to a global pandemic. As an MP, it is my job to listen and to represent the people of my community. And as an independent, it is my job to provide a voice free from party politics and to hold others to scrutiny. It is a privilege to be a Member of Parliament and my privilege to listen to and represent the voice of my community. And the voices have been loud and clear and unfortunately full of pain. I've had thousands of emails and calls to my office, as well as messages on social media from those opposed to an extension and those exhausted by the lockdown. Every single one of those messages, those thousands of messages on Facebook, came from an individual community member who was concerned about this matter. And I can count on one hand, the number of those that have been nasty or threatening, one hand. So most were heartfelt messages from mums and dads, young and old, and a good reflection of my community as well as my multicultural community. In addition, I ran a survey on social media asking my community to vote on whether the state of emergency should be extended, and when I checked it midday today, it had over 50,000 responses. 50,000 individuals who cared enough to go to a website and cast a vote. 48,000 of those who responded, let me repeat that, 48,000 are opposed to any extension of this state of emergency, followed by an extension on a month-to-month basis. I have not used this as a political football, and I am not trying to gain votes. This is not election time. I'm not one of the ones that are bringing members back early from maternity leave to get this bill through. And I respect any mother, any working mother who wants to come to work. But I do hope that Samantha will be here tomorrow for non-government business and every other day that we sit from now on in. No, she is. Yes, she is. She is in her room. She is nursing her child, and I respect that. As a mother of 5 who had her children at her feet while she worked, I absolutely respect Dr. Ratman's choosing to bring her child to work and to work today. But I do hope this is just not a one-off. These tens of thousands of people felt strongly enough to reach out and to contact me. My community is telling me loud and clear. They are frustrated, they are angry, they are suffering, they are telling me their stories of only being able to see their ageing parents twice this year, or not being able to see their children who are out of work, who have mental health problems, of not being able to visit relatives in palliative care, or financial problems, of anxiety and depression, and of suicide. They are also grieving, some for loved ones that they have lost, many more for their old way of life, their freedom and their work. And they do not have the physical presence of others to comfort them. More and more are finding it harder to be motivated to work from home. Even highly skilled and successful members of my community are finding it tough. All of this has been well documented in medical and research journals. And what is making it harder is the black and white nature of the current rules. My office was contacted by a son trying to visit his dying mother in palliative care in regional Victoria. We contacted Minister Makakos's office, we contacted Minister Neville's office, and the response we received was to go to the DHHS website. Now, this is not an isolated incident, but reflective of hundreds of my community members. This black and white approach seems simple and practical on the surface, but it cannot go on forever, and certainly not be a blanket for another 6 to 12 months. Life is not black and white. There are many shades of grey. Each and every case is different, and where the rules exist, they don't reflect this. The community deserves better governance. Hundreds of people that have contacted me stated that they see the extension of the state of emergency as a loss of their democratic rights. They are telling me that if Parliament sits regularly, we don't need an extension, that we have a Parliament for a reason, that their voices will be completely silenced as the people they elect to be their voice, their concerns, will not be consulted before decisions are being made. We are all those members of Parliament. We are not being consulted. The parliamentary website clearly states that the function of Parliament includes forming a government from among its members, making new laws and updating old laws, and examining and approving government's taxes and spending. And particularly important to this global pandemic, representing the people, holding the government to account for its policies and its actions. To the importance of this Parliament, the people of Victoria are correct. Noteworthy is the entrance of this Parliament. The inscription from the proverb 11.14 on the floor of the vestibule reads, "Where no counsel is the people fall, but in the multitudes of counsellors there is safety." How many have walked over this and given this much thought? Yet here you are asking us, through this amendment, to hand over these functions during the biggest crisis this state has faced. How is that democracy? The Premier and their Cabinet must be accountable to the people of Victoria through a fully functioning Parliament with regular oversight and representation. Whilst undoubtedly a lot of important and life-saving work has been done by this government, unfortunately, the copybook is blotted by the handling of quarantine and not protecting our vulnerable. A further 12 months or even 6 months of these powers without scrutiny is too much. I do not deny that there is a pandemic. I do not deny that there is COVID. I do not deny the seriousness of this, and I do not deny that this is not influenza. I am horrified that the members of my community are dying, but this is not the first pandemic. Why wasn't a pandemic plan written at the time of writing the Public and Health Wellbeing Act in 2008? Why, back 6 months ago, were we updating and creating a pandemic plan that could be used? Why are we now trying to change our existing legislation to suit today's situation? Why would we hand over control to the Chief Health Officer even when there are no cases? So far, the communication with the members of this House who do not occupy a Labor seat have been, quite frankly, appalling. There is a great deal of experience within this chamber and a number of strong voices representing their communities. We deserve to be represented, and that's what we are elected to do. And where is the communication with the broad range of medical experts, not just epidemiologists. Sorry, I stumbled on that one. Where is the communication with local government who deal with their communities on a daily basis? Are you tapping into that vast wealth of knowledge? Are you asking them what the needs of their community are when it comes to recovery? Asking how and when to communicate with their community members. I tell you, but some of the local governments are well ahead of this state government when it comes to recovery and having recovery plans. The Premier just needs to go and collect all of the recovery plans that the local governments have already written. My electorate has been the worst hit by COVID. Yet several of the councils in my area have developed comprehensive recovery plans. They want to work with the government to implement those plans. It is poor communication which is the largest problem that we face. The extension of the state of emergency was proposed without announcement of policy or plan in relation to the response and recovery from this global pandemic, with no information on how we're going to navigate out of this. Stressed, tired people, many of whom have been suffering, were left to speculate. It is not a surprise that many thought it meant 12 months of being locked down, not seeing their friends and family, and unemployed at this time. That democracy would not be on, that democracy actually would be on hold at this time. People need hope. People need to see a way out. As a member of this Parliament, I understand that the amendment to the Public Health and Wellbeing Act ensures elements of the public health response can be called upon at a moment's notice. It may truly be required. Indeed, it may be demanded by another wave of this virus. On this basis, we obviously need something in place to protect our community. But with the announcement, I could not see a plan. And so I ask this government today, where is the plan? Why are we not gathering today to debate and implement a long-term recovery-focused policies? The Chief Health Officer has stated that he thinks we are over the worst of it. So shouldn't we be concentrating on recovery? In fact, this should be something that it should have begun months ago. If this is truly a health response, then how is the time to respond? The situation, this situation is no longer acute, but chronic. And we need a long-term management plan. As we are reminded in our daily updates, this is a global pandemic, and there is definitely enough global evidence within for scientific communities to be able to make decisions that benefit more people. We are talking about people's lives and livelihoods. We need to have compassion, and compassion needs to come into play, and we need to know how and why decisions are being made. We need to look at how we can get businesses back on their feet. We need to get our health system up and running for all Victorians. We need to consider those who are sick, but also the entire community, most of whom are fit and well and doing the right thing. We need to get our community back on its feet. The people of Victoria need hope. The people of Victoria need a plan. This pandemic has not just caused suffering, but it also has amplified those problems and suffering that already existed. Physical illness and death, stresses and anxiety, financial problems and social instability. Alleviation of that suffering, governance and communication must be the key parts of this response. Like others here, I have had to weigh up the response from my community and consider it in the light of what is needed contained in a COVID norm. Regrettably, I see an extension of the state of emergency is needed in some way, shape or form. But we can't do this without scrutiny, without oversight, with Parliament sitting, with a return of democracy, with a plan for recovery, with compassion and mechanisms in place to ensure that the needs of the individual are taken into account, with clear communication and the community knowing when restrictions can be lifted. Give us hope. Finally, let's remember what is written on the vestibule floor. At the heart of this building, in a multitude of councillors, there is safety. I will not be supporting this bill. And with a few minutes to spare, I want to go into some of the debate that I've actually heard over today. And first being that it is very difficult to support a bill that, in all respect, that we were given 4 o'clock last night. Now, others in this chamber have said that they have been working with the government for 2 weeks. Well, I'd love to know about those secret conversations in some back room. Because when we knew about it, the crossbench, was last Monday with a courtesy call, as others have said today, with a courtesy call that the Premier was going to announce it at 11 o'clock. At 3 p.m, we had a briefing with no bill in front of us. And as I said this morning, if it wasn't for the opposition at 6:30 that night sending me a draft exposure bill, I would not have had it. The government, and I've gone through my emails because I remember all the interjection this morning, and I can assure you that it was the government sending me, saying that there was obviously something in the system that we didn't all receive it. So I received it the Wednesday morning, but truly I didn't receive it from the government till that Thursday afternoon. So we spent a whole week working on that. I had got legal counsel and advice. I had been listening to my community. And then, on this weekend, the government has decided to throw that out and to put this in front of us. The conversations that I have had with the Health Minister have been full and frank. Very frank last week when I explained that how my community has been hurting, but also full and frank how I have been hurting. The last time we sat, I mentioned my nephew, and the very next day I had the misfortune of being there when my nephew died. So for myself, I realised there and then the black and white restrictions and how they are not taking into consideration my community's expectations, why they are losing faith in the government because a lot of the restrictions do not make sense. This government needs to listen to the community in being compassionate, in being flexible and being nimble. They have made many errors over these last 6 months, and those errors probably wouldn't have been made in 2008 when this Act was, so the Public and Health and Wellbeing Act in 2008, if at that time they wrote up a pandemic plan. I understand that that Act was written in the thought that we might be experiencing a flu pandemic, And I can assure you there are a lot of local governments at that particular time who have actually pandemic plans in the way of flu. And what they have done is they've changed those plans into COVID plans. Why hasn't this government done that? Why haven't they been as nimble, and why isn't there a pandemic plan sitting around anywhere since 2008? And now we are, and I think rightly so, looking at other jurisdictions that don't actually have the same debate that we're having at this point in time. The other point that needs to be made today is that this is very unusual, but the council is sitting and the lower house will be sitting later this week. What is also highly unusual is that we have been given a bill without all the due diligence that is normally taking place, which is it normally goes to the lower house and then it sits. So for 2 weeks, we actually have 2 weeks of an opportunity to go through it. There is also normally there are other measures in place where those checks and balances go through the other committees. So unfortunately, none of those checks and balances have occurred. None of those checks and balances have occurred. They couldn't have possibly occurred when you write something the night before and you put it into the Parliament's lap. Why I cannot support this bill is because of the way it has been thrown into my lap. And others can say that they feel that they have been able to contribute to it. Well, it was probably a select one or two, not the whole crossbench. And this, to treat us as members of Parliament in that manner, to not allow myself to be able to put that out to my community to receive feedback, I obviously cannot support this legislation today. And there'll be others in my community who will feel that as a doctor of Chinese medicine and as someone who has worked in the medical field for many years, that somehow is not the right response. That somehow I should support this legislation, and because that's the only tool that we have. No, there are other tools that we have, and what I have witnessed in the last 6 months, in relation to health, to the communication out to the community from this government, has been, quite frankly, extremely poor. The health messages that should be going out to my community about how they could actually be safe during these COVID times are not occurring. Why they haven't actually looked at the health response in a holistic manner, when they realised what lockdowns do to people's mental health, why they have not taken that into consideration in this COVID response is astounding. To think that we're going to deal with these mental health problems down the road somehow. Why they have stopped elective surgery. Why do people feel that they can't come out and see a GP for their medical problems? So there is going to be a long list of health concerns after this pandemic is over. And do we have the medical system that will be able to look after this? I wonder. It is great to see the Minister for Health coming in. I'm looking forward, Mrs. Makakos, to hear your contribution, Minister. But I'm also looking forward to hearing other contributions in this debate. I think I'll leave my contribution at that.
Thank you.